Greetings YouTube, welcome to this video tutorial about a simple introduction to the C programming language. Before we start talking about the C programming language, I will talk about two types of programming languages. Those we call interpreted and compiled programming languages. The interpreted programming languages are simple scripts that you write, and after that you call an interpreter that will translate them into the machine language and execute them. For example, Python or PHP, you simply write the scripts, and after that you call the Python interpreter to execute your code. Compiled programming languages are a different matter. You need, after that you write your code. For example, C programming language, it is a compiled language. After you write your code, you must compile it, you must transform it into a binary file that will be executed as a machine language. So for C programming language, if you are using Linux, your chances are that you already have GCC, for example. It is our compiler, the C programming language compiler. If not, you must install it. Under Windows, either you are using, for example, Visual Studio, their platform for creating C++ or C applications, or you can simply use something simple like dev C++, dev cpp. This is a program to compile C language file. Okay, let's create our first program. Let's create something like this: vim first.c. Any typical C program must contain two parts. The first part in which we include every library that our program will require later. So we must write something like this symbol here. Let's call it hashtag. It is not a hashtag. Include. Then we write something like this: stdio.h. It is the standard input-output library. In this file here, it exists. This file stdio.h, it is a file that exists somewhere in my file system. In this file we have defined, or those who created the C programming language have defined every function or everything that I will need or require in order to use the input and the output library, or the for example, later on I want to output some message to the user who executes my program, or if I want to input something from them, like a variable or something like that. If at some point I know that my program will require, for example, math formulas or math functions, I must include something like this: include math.h. For example, this file also exists somewhere in my file system. So for as an introduction to the C programming language, we will only require the standard input and output library. And then the second and most important part in every C program is what we call the entry point of the program. The entry point of the program is the main function that will be executed when we execute our program. It is written like so: int main. Actually, this function comes in many different ways, but this is a simple introduction to the C programming language. Let's execute or write the most simple version of this function main. It is written like so, and we must return a value. Let's call it 0. This is the most basic or the most simple C program that we can write. This program does nothing. It only executes the main function that does nothing at this point and only returns 0. If I do something like this, cd my folder, you may see that I have this first.c. As I mentioned before, the C programming language is a compiled program or a compiled language, so I must compile it in order to execute it. So I must call something like gcc first, and now if I list my file, I see this file here, a.out. This is an executable file. It is a binary file, not a text file. If I cut it like so, it is a binary file. It only shows garbage here. So if I execute it like so, a.out, it does nothing because this program is still empty. So let's write our first instruction in our program like so, printf hello world, and then a new line character. Every instruction in the C programming language must end by, or every line must end with this semicolon. This is the structure of the C programming language. It is the oldest language of them all. It has this structure here. This is how we write the C program. In other, for example, later languages, most recent languages like Python or something else, they are simple. They don't require this structure like so. So if I go back to my folder here, if I execute once again gcc to compile my program, it is compiled. If I execute a.out, now I see this message here that was outputted to the user via this function here, printf. Okay, let's move on. At some point, every program must define or must include some part or some variables to make it dynamic or something else. So we must define what we call variables, and in the C programming language there are many variables, but the most basic ones of them are what we call the integers. Those who have some knowledge of mathematics knows what an integer is, or the real numbers. To define an integer, a variable of type integer, we refer to them by the keyword int. You may see it that it is highlighted here. And the real numbers are referred to by the keyword float. Why is that? Well, because the real numbers are always written something like this, 12.35. In every real number there is a point like so here, and this point is a floating point. It changes position in every real number, so it is a floating point. So we call them, the real numbers, we call them float. So let's define our first variable here. So if I write something like this, int a semicolon, now I have declared a variable a that I named a. It is of the type integer. I might call it anything I want. I can call it a or b or anything. So if I write something like this, a, this symbol here of equality, and 2, and then semicolon, you must know that at this point I shall not call it a equals 2, but you must always remember that this means that the variable a receives, I must emphasize this, the word receives, the value 2. We are taking the value a and saving it into the variable a. The variable a receives the value 2. So if I write something like this, %d, and then comma here, and then a, this is the structure of the function printf. You must remember it like so. So I declared a variable of the type integer a, then the variable a receives the value 2, and then at this point the function printf will print out the value of the variable. So let's compile the program once again, and then let's execute it. We must see, we can see now the value 2. If I do something like this, the variable a now receives the value 5, and then semicolon, compile the program once again, and then execute it. We see 5. So every now and then, at some point, we can write something like this: the variable a receives the variable a plus 1. Now imagine that this is the new variable a, and this is the oldest variable a. The old variable a has the value 5. Let's remove this one. So this a that has the value 5, it is this one. We add to it the value 1, and then the result will be received by the variable a itself. You might have guessed it by now that the value that will be printed out here is the value 6. The old value of a will be incremented, we will add 1 to it, and we will input or output the value 6, like so. That's good. That's this operation that we did here. It is called incrementing the value of a. So this is what we call incrementing the value of a. There is the opposite operation, which is decrementing a. If I write something like this, the variable a receives the oldest value, which is 5, the oldest the oldest version of a, if we made, that is 5, and then decremented by 1, i.e. subtract 1, and then the value will be 4. So let's go. Oh, I didn't save. So, and then we have 4. But in the C programming language, at some point we will write something like this: a plus equals 3, then semicolon. So let's remove this highlighting. Okay, the symbol here, it is the same as writing a receives a plus 3. The main point of this is to write a code as small as possible, if you might. It is a short version of this: a receives a plus 3. It is a plus equals 3. At this point, the value that will be printed out is 8. So let's compile the program, then execute it. It will be 8. There is a more concise version, a more if you may, it is more shorter version of this incrementation. It is when we write something like this: a plus plus semicolon. This a plus plus means the variable a receives the variable a plus 1. It is a shorter version of this. So at this point, if we have a equals or receive the value 5, we add it to a 3, which is 8, and then we increment by 1, which is a receives a plus 1. That will give us 9 at the end. So we compile, and once again we have 9. Okay, I think I will stop here, and I will continue with this introduction to the C programming language in a later video. Thank you for watching.